In this video, I will show you how to integrate PocketBase with SvelteKit 1.0 as well as create login and registration pages. So to get started, we will get PocketBase up and running. So create a directory and cd into it. Head on to the PocketBase website, go to the documentation section and select the appropriate binary for your system. Download the file and unzip it. Next, run PocketBase serve. Okay, the server has started. So head on to the admin UI by clicking on this link. Next, you will need to create your first admin account. Cool, we are in. We are going to create our SvelteKit project next. Open up a new terminal window and run npm create svelte followed by the name of your project. Select skeleton project. We are going to use TypeScript. We're going to also enable ESLinting and prettifier. We are not going to do testing. Okay, then cd into that directory. We are going to install Tailwind CSS and Daisy UI for styling. Now you can install both of them manually, but there is a nice tool called SvelteAdd that will install them for you automatically. Pass Daisy UI as an argument to install Daisy UI, as well as enable form stylings and typography. Run npm install to install dependencies. Now start the development server to test it out. Click on this link to open in your web browser. Cool, it's working. Alright, let's get coding. So the first thing I normally do is I reformat the entire code base. So to do so, run npm run format. Next, I'm going to change the Daisy UI theme. Open the src directory and app.html file. I'm going to add a new attribute called data theme to the HTML tag, and I'm going to use the lo-fi theme. As you can see, the theme changed. I'm going to add a very basic layout next. So open up the routes directory and the layout file. I'm going to add a very basic Cool, let's see our changes. Looking good. Now let's install the PocketBase SDK next. So run npm install PocketBase. If you go back to the PocketBase instance and click on the API preview button, you can see some useful code snippets here. Now create a directory called lib under the src directory, and under the lib directory create a file called pocketbase.ts. Now paste the code that we copied earlier and export the variable pb. It is good practice to configure the base URL as an environment variable. So to do so, create a .env file in your root directory. Name this environment variable public PocketBase URL and set the value to the base URL. It is important to prefix it with public so that it is also available on the front end. Now replace the string value of the base URL with the environment variable. It is important to note that this client is shared between the front end and the back end. Let's work on the front end client first. We're going to create a store here to store the current user. Next, create a client hook. Under the src directory, create a file called hooks.client.ts. This hook will run when the page first loads on the web browser. We will need to register a callback to set the state of the current user that we created earlier whenever the session data changes. So to do that, import pb again, offStore on change. So whenever the authentication storage changes, set the current user to that object again. By default, the SDK stores data on the user's local storage, which is only visible on the front end and not the back end. So to fix this, we will need to instead store the session data in cookies. We will need to make two changes. So the first change is to ensure we load the session data from cookies. And secondly, whenever the session data changes, we need to set the cookie data. We also need to set HTTP only to false so that the front end can also read the cookie. Now let's work on the backend client. Similarly to the client hooks, we need to create one for the server. So create a new file called hooks.server.ts. We will need to create a handler. At the very minimum, it is an async function which receives two variables, which are event and resolve. In this method, you can decide what to do before a response, during a response, and after a response. Be sure to return the response. Now, similarly to the front-end client, we need to configure the backend client to read cookies as well. So to do so, import pb again, offStore load from cookie. We're going to read the cookie header. Next, we need to check if the token is still valid. At this point, the token is not expired. We still need to check with the server if the token is still valid. So do an await pb collection users of refresh. Now this method may error, so I would wrap it in a try catch block. If the token is not valid, we should clear it like so. We also need to update the cookies. So set the response header and export the token as a cookie. Again, set HTTP only to false so that the front-end code can read the cookie. Now in SvelteKit, there is a special locals property that you can use to pass context to our backend handler. So to do that, type event.locals followed by the name of your property. In my case, I will make the PocketBase client and the user object available to our backend handlers. Please note that the user model is a record object, so we need to convert it into a plain JavaScript object so that SvelteKit can serialize it as JSON. To do that, simply run structured clone to deep clone the object. As soon as we add new attributes to the locals object, type checking errors. To fix this, open our app.d.ts file, which stores all the types for our interfaces, and we will need to add both pb and user to the locals interface. So uncomment and add pb and user. Now let's go back and you can see the error disappears. Next, we're going to create the registration page. If you look at the PocketBase guide and under the create a user action, you can see all the fields that we need to pass in order to create a user. Now some of these fields are optional. In this tutorial, we will just focus on passing the email and password. Now under the routes directory, create a new folder called register and then create a file called page.svelte. We're going to create a very basic form now. Now let's see our changes. Next, we will need to handle the form action. So create a page.server file and create a default action. In this action, we need the locals object and request. We then need to pass the form data and because we are in TypeScript, we need to cast it into the appropriate object. Now that we have the data, we need to create the user. So remember we set the locals.pb earlier. This is where we use it. We also want to log the user in as soon as they register, so do that in the next line. We're gonna catch any errors. For now, we're just gonna rethrow the error. We will do proper error handling in a future video. Finally, we will redirect the user to the home page. Cool, let's test it out. So I'm going to create a user here. And if I go to my PocketBase instance, I should see that user. Let's use progressive enhancement in our form. So if we go back to our page.svelte file, we will need to create a script block. And we need to import two things, apply action and enhance from the $app forms module. We also need to import our PocketBase client. Now in the form tag, we will need to use the progressive enhancement to pass in our callback. So we will return an async function, and by default we will apply the action to the result. When the server returns a successful response, it will set a cookie. So we need to tell our front-end client to load the cookie. So to do that, just run pb.offstore.load from cookie, and we're going to read it from the document cookie. Let's go to our layout file and use the store. Let's import the current user store and show a logout link if the user is logged in. Be sure to use the $sign to use the store value. Now let's verify our changes. Now if you refresh, you should see a logout link. Now let's implement the logout action. So under routes, create a new folder called logout and a page.server file. We will need to implement the logout action as a form action. Again, we will need the locals property. So we use locals.pb.offStore.clear method to clear the user, as well as setting the user property to null. Finally, we redirect the user back to the home page. Now if we go back to our layout, we will need to convert the logout link into a form. So let's delete this and create a new form. Set the method to post and the action to that logout route that we created earlier. And in the form element, just simply create a logout button. We will also need to do progressive enhancement here. So import apply action and enhance again. And use it here. Apply the action like normal. And we will need to clear the authentication store. Cool, that's the logout action. Let's test it out. Cool, and we're logged out. Finally, let's create the login page. I will close all the tabs for now. Under the routes directory, create a new folder called login. Now, the login folder is very similar to the registration page. So expand register and copy both the page.server file and the page file. Now open the page.svelte file and just delete the password confirm field. We don't need that. Change the heading as well and the button. Next, open the page.server file. Again, we don't need the password confirm field, so delete that. And we don't need to create the user here, so delete that as well. That's it. So if you go back and click on the login link, you can see there's a login form. So let's try it again. Log in, and we are in. Let's put the user's email here. So let's go back to the layout. And before the logout link, create a new element and show the user's email here. Cool, as you can see, the email shows up correctly. Again, let's try it again. Let's log out and register a new user. I'll call it test2 now. Click register. Okay, we are logged in. Check PocketBase to make sure the user is actually created. Let's try logging out and logging back in again. Cool, everything works. Well, I hope you found this video useful. If you have any comments or suggestions, I would love to hear from you in the comments section below. The full source code for this tutorial is available on GitHub and the link is included in the description box below. If you want to be notified of new videos like this one, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.